My name is Carianne Funicelli, and I have a company called Strategic Habitat Enhancements, and I help people with bringing the magic of nature to their backyard with native plants, and I also do natural resources consulting. My work is really kind of all about nature in the city. My background is in habitat restoration in natural plant communities and wild spaces like national parks and national forests, and Fish and Wildlife Service preserves and things like that. But I have now found myself working more and more in the urban space, and specifically a lot in people's backyards and front yards. And people are really excited about having more birds and butterflies and that sort of thing in their yards in the city. And it sounds kind of quaint and sweet, but I'm finding that after 6 years of doing this, I'm creating these connections across the city. I have a map of all my different projects, and it really helps me to understand that I'm actually doing conservation, wildland conservation in the urban context. I've been having a really good time working with the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection on the wildlife crossings on Oracle, so almost to Catalina. There's an overpass, and about a mile south of that there is an underpass. And they were built in 2016 after many, many years of study and work and convincing funders, all of that. And so when they were originally constructed, I was lucky to be able to I designed the seed mix that went down after initial construction. So there's about 20 species in the mix. But now, almost 10 years later, it's really cool to see, okay, what has been established, and now what can we bring in that wouldn't have been necessarily appropriate at the hydroseeding level right after construction, but now that there is some vegetation structure there, how can we increase the resources for wildlife that are using that bridge? So now we're bringing in more wildflowers and other trees and lots of agaves. The agaves have been very successful, and we're doing some additional seeding. 100% my work relates to wildlife in the city. I often am focusing on pollinator gardens, which is a nice umbrella term for insect gardens, and let's have as many insects in the city as possible as the base of the food chain. Without a diverse insect fauna, we don't have birds, we don't have lizards, we don't have everything that comes up the food chain after them. And so I really focus on the insects, and then everything else comes after. But I do laugh with my clients sometimes because we'll spend a lot of effort putting in a project, and we're gardening for wildlife, and then the wildlife shows up, it destroys everything. And so sometimes it can be a very iterative process with like, oh wow, for instance, this past year with having such a dry winter, I've seen javelina and rabbits going after plants that they don't generally go after because there's so few resources on wild landscapes. It's increasing the pressure on our urban landscapes, and they're desperate. They're desperate for resources, and our gardens are providing that. So I've worked with a lot of people who maybe at first weren't so excited about inviting insects into their garden in the way that I envision, but over time it does get exciting to get emails and texts from people with photos of the caterpillars that are eating the leaves of the Mexican sunflower, and they're very excited because they figured out what it was, or they want to know what it is. And it provides this touch point for us to engage with our surroundings in a way that is not only good for broader biodiversity, but it's good for our hearts, it's good for our minds, it's good for our relationships with other people. I know that I'm a nicer person when I get to dig in the soil occasionally. I think that my biggest mission, thinking about my legacy, my career, I want to leave life knowing that I empowered lots of people to make better choices, and that lots and lots of species got to exist in our city because of it, and that it brings people lots of joy. I know that one of the things that people rightly catastrophize about is water. And I think that Tucson does a pretty amazing job of promoting water harvesting and conservation and all of that. And I think that we all want to do such good. And sometimes we get so caught up on every single drop of water that we use that we're not really thinking very clearly. We have been conditioned to be very ashamed of using water, ashamed of wasting water, and I agree 100%. Like, we shouldn't be wasting water in our landscape on plants that, you know, aren't native here, aren't providing, you know, a good function, and that aren't contributing to the local ecology. That said, we're still flushing our toilets with groundwater. Flushing our toilets with groundwater. And so I don't want anybody in Tucson feeling bad about watering a native tree. In fact, please water your plants. Water your native plants. We now have to water plants to keep them healthy that folks who've lived here for a long time they say to me all the time, but I've never had to water that plant. Why would I water that plant? It's a native plant. Well, if you go out hiking and you really look at what's going on in our natural landscapes, our plants need water. And if you want them to thrive, if you want them to look nice, which, you know, we want our plants to look nice, but they will also be more functional ecologically if they're healthier and if they have appropriate water. Water your plants. Get them to grow. Shade our city. Create habitat and joy.